In the heart of New York's most luxurious restaurant before dozens of elite guests, a wealthy businessman suddenly hurled a glass of red wine onto the waitress Emma, and the room erupted in mocking laughter. The Aurelia, a restaurant on Fifth Avenue in New York, was a place only the most powerful dared to enter. A massive crystal chandelier cast golden light across pristine white tablecloths. The delicate clink of silverware against fine porcelain rose like a fragile symphony. The scent of aged wine mingled with melted butter and seared steak. Guests in tuxedos and gowns glanced at one another with smiles so polished they cut like knives. Amidst this grandeur moved Emma Miller, her brown hair neatly tied back, her worn shoes scuffed at the heels, her hands balancing a heavy silver tray. Her heart raced. On the tray rested a bottle of Burgundy in crystal-clear glasses. Each step past the long rows of tables felt like stepping onto a battlefield, a place where she knew she was only a shadow. At the honor table sat Mrs. Collins, widow of a legendary tycoon, her face carved in stone, her cold eyes surveying the room as if she commanded it. Beside her was Ryan Collins, her son, his suit sharp, his tie a deep navy blue. Yet unlike his mother, Ryan's gaze often drifted toward the windows where the lights of New York flickered like stars. Emma approached, tilting the Burgundy gently. Red wine spiraled into each glass, catching the light in rich dark hues. Careful girl, sneered Mr. Grant, a silver-haired Wall Street mogul. One drop costs more than you'll earn in a year. A ripple of laughter spread across the table. Emma steadied her voice. Yes, sir. I'll be very careful. But as she reached the last glass, Grant suddenly seized her wrist. His grip was firm cold. How long have you been doing this? Saved enough for tuition yet? Or still just the poor little girl dreaming of sitting at our table? The table erupted in laughter. Emma lowered her head, trying to hide the trembling in her hands. She wanted to pull away, but his grip tightened. Her eyes stung with tears. Ryan shifted, ready to speak, but Mrs. Collins pressed her hand on his wrist, a leash disguised as maternal control. Stay still. Then, with a cruel smirk, Grant lifted his glass, looked Emma up and down, and flung the wine across her chest. The crimson splash hit her blouse, searing hot, seeping through her apron, spreading like a bloodstain. For a split second, the room froze, then laughter exploded. Phones rose. Flashbulbs burst, turning Emma into public spectacle. Emma stood paralyzed. Every stare cut into her skin like 100 blades. Her pulse thundered in her ears, her throat locked. Instinct forced words past her lips. I'm so sorry, let me clean. Clean. Grant threw his head back with laughter. A waitress can't wash away what she is. Filth stays filth. The laughter returned sharper, louder, tearing at Emma's chest. She bowed her head, clutching the edge of her apron, her face burning with shame. For a moment, she wanted nothing more than to vanish from the world. But Ryan didn't stay seated. His chair scraped loudly against the polished wood floor as he rose. Silence fell. All eyes followed as he crossed the grand table, ignoring his mother's glare. Beneath the crystal lights, Ryan stopped in front of Emma, shielding her from their jeers. From his pocket, he drew a silk handkerchief. Gently, he dabbed at the deep red stain spreading across her blouse. His voice was low, steady. You don't need to apologize. Not tonight. Not for this. Emma lifted her tear-filled eyes to his bright, unwavering. And for a suspended moment, New York's most opulent dining hall stood utterly still. In a world where money defines worth, a sincere heart is dismissed. The Aurelia stood proudly on Fifth Avenue, a jewel of glass and steel, where anyone who stepped inside instinctively straightened their spine. The ceilings soared heavy crystal chandeliers dripping down and scattering thousands of golden flecks of light like stardust. Every detail radiated luxury, immaculate white tablecloths, scented candles glowing in crystal holders, $1,000 bottles of wine displayed behind glass. The air carried a heady mix, the nutty aroma of brown butter melting over steak, the rich depth of aged grapes, and faint traces of expensive perfumes worn by the diners. The soft clink of silverware rang out in constant rhythm like a fragile background score. Laughter whispers of million-dollar deals, chairs sliding gracefully across polished wooden floors. Every sound was curated, elegant, precise. In the midst of this grandeur moved Emma Miller, balancing a silver tray in her hands. At 23, she had a slender frame, her brown hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck, her delicate features shadowed by faint dark circles, remnants of late-night shifts. Her black shoes were worn at the heels, but she polished them every evening so they would still shine beneath the chandeliers. Her heart always beat a little faster when she stepped into this space. Not out of fear, but from the pressure she knew she was nothing more than a moving shadow. Here, a nameless server meant to disappear quietly behind the spectacle of wealth. As she poured wine at the VIP table, Emma's hand was steady to the point of numbness. Each drop of Burgundy swirled in the crystal glass, a deep crimson spiral reflecting the chandelier's glow. From the corner of her ear, she caught a guest's voice murmur to his companion. New girl. Isn't she? Looks clumsy. A ripple of polite laughter followed. Emma heard every note, but she still smiled, lowering her head and practiced humility. Inside, the words pierced like fine needles. She didn't dream of being extraordinary. Emma's dreams were humble, simply paying rent for her tiny apartment, saving enough to one day re-enroll in the community college course she had left behind. Interior design. That was her quiet ambition. But tonight, that dream felt like a blurred photograph hung too far away to touch. Still, Emma forced herself to remain calm. She knew a single drop of wine in the wrong place could cost her the job. And if that happened, her cramped little apartment and the fragile dreams it sheltered could vanish with it. At the center of the Aurelia's grand dining hall, where the chandelier's brilliance shone brightest, the Collins family commanded their own orbit of space. No one in the restaurant dared turn their back on them. The mere sight of the Collins name on the reservation list was enough for the manager to secure the most prestigious table assigned, the most attentive servers, and whisper instructions to the staff, not a single mistake, not even the smallest one. Mrs. Margaret Collins, the widow of late real estate tycoon Harold Collins, was the evening's axis. In her early 50s, her hair was swept into a neat chignon, silver strands glinting beneath the light. A string of ivory pearls graced her neck. Her smile was rarely soft. It was more a polite mask than an expression of warmth. Behind her eyes flickered constant calculation and an unshakable belief the wealth and honor of the Collins family must never be tainted by outsiders. Around her gathered wealthy relatives and trusted friends, business magnates, politicians, faces so familiar they belonged on the society pages. They raised glasses, traded conspiratorial glances, spoke of new Manhattan developments, or whispered about corporate takeovers. To them, dinner was never just dinner. It was a theater where power and money were brandished like silent weapons. Beside his mother sat Ryan Collins, 26, the family's only son. Unlike the proud, sharp edges of his kin, Ryan seemed apart, almost removed. His deep navy suit fit flawlessly, but it couldn't mask the quiet gravity in his gaze. He often looked beyond the room toward the wide windows where New York's lights glittered like artificial stars. Ryan was not like the others. Raised in privilege, yes, but his heart resisted its coldness. He had slipped away to join volunteer groups, spent hours serving soup to the homeless, never telling his mother. There, in cramped kitchens and long lines, he had felt something real warmth. Humanity, things no banquet ever gave him. To Margaret, her son was destined to marry a woman of equal pedigree, wealth, prestige, a union that would reinforce the Collins empire. But to Ryan, the thought was a golden cage. He had never believed love should be dictated by money. Tonight, as his eyes fell upon Emma, the waitress struggling to steady her silver tray, his heartbeat faltered. Her small hands trembled slightly as she poured, but her eyes glimmered behind a practiced smile. Ryan recognized that look, the gaze of someone carrying more than she should have to someone holding tight to fragile dignity just to survive. Then Emma looked up. For the briefest moment, her eyes met his. Two souls from worlds apart, yet both recognizing the other. She quickly lowered her gaze, but a spark had already caught in Ryan's chest. Margaret's eyes missed nothing. She glanced at Ryan, then at the young waitress, her lips pressing into a thin line. No words were spoken, but her gaze carried the verdict. Never. Emma felt it too, that invisible weight pressing down on her shoulders. When Ryan shifted slightly, his hand twitching as if to steady her tray, silence hung over the table for half a second. A few stares bore into her stares, dripping with contempt, as though she had just crossed a line she wasn't meant to. Emma's heart stuttered in her chest, uneven and frantic. Yet amid the fear, a fragile warmth flickered, born from the hand that had almost, if only for a moment, reached for hers. Her shift ended close to midnight. Outside New York still blazed with light cars streaming past neon billboards, screaming colors into the night, a city that never truly slept. Emma hurried down the crowded streets, her thin coat useless against the chill wind rolling in from the Hudson. Her legs ached, but her pace never faltered. Years of work had taught her that if she stopped even for a heartbeat, her body might collapse. Her apartment was tucked away in an aging complex on the outskirts of Queens. The wooden stairs groaned under her weight, the flickering fluorescent bulbs buzzing, sometimes lighting, sometimes dying. The hallway walls peeled with old paint, plastered with flyers for loans and cheap services. The room itself was barely larger than a closet, 10 square meters at most. Low ceiling, a tiny window facing a cracked brick wall across the alley. The furniture was sparse: a single bed, a scarred wooden table, a small shelf stuffed with yellowed textbooks. On the wall hung an old photograph Emma and her mother in Central Park years ago. Her mother's smile was the only warmth that could fill the entire space. Emma set down the leftovers the head chef had allowed her to take home and slipped off her shoes. Her feet were raw, blistered red. She dipped a cloth into cold water, pressed it gently against her skin, and winced as pain shot through her bones. In her head, the sounds of the restaurant replayed the clinking of silverware, the cruel laughter as red wine splattered her blouse. She shut her eyes and drew in a long breath, trying to banish the echoes. At the table, she opened a battered notebook. Inside were clumsy sketches, tiny room sofas, window frames with sunlight spilling through. No matter how tired she was, Emma gave herself a few minutes each night to draw. Her dream was to be an interior designer, to build spaces of warmth for people like her. People who longed for a place where they could finally feel safe. Setting down her pencil, Emma lifted her gaze to the dark window. Somewhere beyond, across the skyline of Manhattan, Ryan Collins was likely sitting in a gleaming penthouse surrounded by glittering lights. Only a few miles separated them, yet they lived in different worlds divided by the invisible fences of class. Her heart trembled as she recalled his eyes in the restaurant. In that instant, when Ryan had reached out to steady her tray, the weight of his family's contempt had vanished. What remained was a quiet warmth, an unspoken message. "I see you." Emma's fingers brushed the dried wine stain still clinging to the blouse she had hung in the corner. The bitter scent lingered, a reminder of the humiliation she had endured, but also the moment her life began to shift. She didn't know what the future would hold. All she knew was that for the first time in years, a fragile light stirred inside her heart. Small but steady, like a candle standing its ground against the darkness of her rented room. The Collins residence. 5th Avenue. The dining room was drenched in cold white light. A polished walnut table stretched long beneath a crystal vase filled with lilies, their sharp scent cutting the air. Outside, New York murmured like an ocean. Inside, the faint clink of silverware sounded like warning bells. Mrs. Margaret Collins set her knife down her fingertips, tapping a measured rhythm against the table. A small gesture, yet it drained the air from the room. "Ryan." She released his name slowly, one syllable at a time. "I saw. That night. At the Aurelia." The silence thickened. Ryan paused before answering. "I didn't do anything wrong. You touched her." Her voice dropped like a stone onto still water. "In front of my guests. In front of the press." Uncle Brian coughed, eyes shifting away. Aunt Sophie suddenly busied herself with her phone. Ryan held steady. She was being humiliated. Only Margaret's laugh was a razor-thin blade. "Do you even know who she is?" "A waitress. A girl who would sell her pride for the chance to sit at our table." Ryan's eyes lifted. "You're insulting her." "No." She shook her head. "I'm protecting this family. The Collins name cannot be dragged down by trash." The word shattered the room. Beneath the table, Ryan's fists clenched, veins rising pale against his skin. "I know what you want, Mother," he said slowly. "A marriage stamped in the Collins mold. But you've forgotten something. Money doesn't define a person's dignity. It's time you grew up." She rose, leaning close until her shadow fell across him. "End it. Tonight." The dining room doors closed with a soft hiss as the magnetic lock clicked into place. Ryan sat for several minutes longer, staring at the untouched plate before him, its flavors dead on his tongue. And he wondered, in this gilded house, was there anything left that was real? Emma's apartment. The fluorescent bulb flickered overhead, casting trembling bands of light across the peeling wall. She scrubbed at the blouse she had already washed the red stain from last night, now only a faint bitter smell clinging to the fabric. From the hallway came the shuffle of footsteps, the muffled drone of a television, and the faint rise of an argument through thin walls. A knock at the door. Emma opened it. Ryan stood there, coat dark with night hair damp with mist. His eyes carried both exhaustion and defiance. What are you doing here?" Emma stammered, stepping back to let him in. "To ask if you're all right." She forced a smile. "I'm fine." The smile fell as quickly as a wet leaf dropping from a branch. Ryan's gaze swept the 10-square-meter room. A single bed, a scarred old table, a faded photo of Emma and her mother tacked to the wall, a tiny cactus perched on the windowsill. Everything was clean, carefully arranged, as if she were holding on to the last threads of order in her world. "You don't have to go through this alone," he said quietly. "People like me survive because we endure." Her voice was soft, and then unexpectedly she laughed, a rough, weary laugh. Her phone buzzed, a call from an unknown number. She answered. On the other end, a woman's voice, cold, careful, stripped of any human warmth. "Emma Miller. This is the office of Mrs. Margaret Collins. A word of advice: stay away from her son. You understand what disappear means, don't you?" The line went dead. The screen's glow reflected Emma's face, pale, her eyes wide before slowly closing. Ryan stepped closer. "I'm sorry. For what?" She lifted her gaze. "For letting you stand in the crossfire of my family." Emma shook her head. "You didn't pull the trigger." But she knew some bullets didn't need guns. They were fired with names, with status, with dinners where cruelty was dressed up as discipline. 2 days later, the lobby of a luxury hotel hosting an investment summit. Cameras, microphones, bursts of flash. A banner stretched across a white backdrop lined with sponsor logos. Mr. Grant stood before the press, smiling, speaking as though that night at the Aurelia had never happened, or was nothing more than a joke worth retelling. A reporter asked, There are rumors, Mr. Grant, of tension between you and the Collins family over a waitress interrupting the dinner. Grant's lips curled. Places like the Aurelia have standards. People shouldn't think they can change their lives by spilling wine on their chest. The words flew straight into cameras through fiber cables and onto the front pages of tabloids. Waitress drama at Fifth Avenue. Gold digger or victim wine and honor. Billionaire's son shields. Cinderella. Real or publicity stunt. Social media erupted. The hashtag #GoldDigger trended. Photos of Emma from that night, cruelly cropped, just her wine-stained blouse, just her stunned expression, circulated with vicious captions. Memes were sharper, crueler. At the Aurelia, the manager summoned her to his office. Harsh white fluorescent lights bore down. A stack of papers sat on the desk. "Emma, you've been a good employee," he said, eyes avoiding hers. "But you understand the situation. The VIP guests, they're unhappy. The owner's under pressure. I'm very sorry. A termination slip. Reason damaging the restaurant's image." When Emma descended the stairs for the last time, her apron folded, her hands empty. The faint clinking of silverware drifted from the kitchen like a luxurious refrain sealing its doors forever against her. Emma's phone lit up, exploding with messages, unknown numbers, anonymous accounts. "Girls like you only know how to cling to rich men. Can diamonds cover up the stench of poverty? Keep dreaming." Her inbox filled with emails, one from a reporter. "We'll pay $1,000 for an exclusive interview. Another partnership offer, if you're willing to tell the truth about Ryan." Humiliation disguised as opportunity. Emma powered off her phone. The walls of her tiny apartment seemed to close in. She hugged a pillow, leaned against the peeling paint. Silent tears slid down her cheeks, not out of weakness but from the helplessness of facing a tidal wave barehanded. On the table lay her sketchbook, still open, a half-drawn window, the light unfinished. Her pencil slipped from the edge, rolled in a small arc, and stopped. Emma picked it up, her hand trembling. She tried to draw a single straight line. The graphite snapped. She broke down again, this time deeper, quieter. The pillow grew wet beneath her face. Her chest tightened. Pain pressed in from within, sharp as a fist around her ribs. Outside the window, car horns, voices calling across the street, a distant pop song. The city spun on. Only she remained still, frozen like a shadow no one noticed. The glass-walled boardroom of Collins Holdings. A long oval table, black leather chairs. On the screen, graphs of red and green flickered. At the head of the table, Mrs. Margaret Collins sat upright, her tweed jacket buttoned with precision. Beside her lay a file bound neatly with ribbon, Harrington Collins merger. The door opened. Charlotte Harrington entered, the daughter of an East Coast real estate dynasty. Gray eyes, golden hair cascading in soft waves. She shook hands, her smile as flawless as a magazine cover. Margaret's words were clipped. "Charlotte is respectable, well-educated. Her family is a perfect match. Together, the two houses will secure the Midtown project." The board nodded in unison. This wasn't about love. This was business. Ryan leaned back in his chair, staring at the file as if it were a diamond-studded shackle. "I won't sign." Heads turned. "Excuse me," Margaret's tone remained even. "I won't get engaged," Ryan said slowly, deliberately, "because that's not love, and it's not right." A heartbeat of silence. Then came the noise, muted laughter, a whispered, naive boy, papers rustling like restless wings. "Don't be foolish," one board member snapped. "The Harringtons are saving us in Midtown." Ryan's gaze stayed steady. "Collins doesn't need saving if the cost is trampling someone else." Margaret rose, hand pressing the edge of the table. "Then from this day forward, you will attend no more meetings. You hold no authority here." Ryan met her eyes. "If authority is bought by crushing another's dignity, you can keep all of it." Charlotte looked at him, not angry but sad. "I don't wish to be anyone's chain," she whispered. "But I know this: when the wolves decide which way to run, a stray deer only has two choices." Ryan shook his head. "No, there's a third choice. Don't run with them at all." Late afternoon. The sky was a muted gray. Rain began to fall, pattering softly against the window of Emma's apartment. A call from the Aurelia. "We're sorry, but payroll has been delayed, and some of the compensation packages will be postponed." Emma closed her eyes. "I understand." A message buzzed from a coworker. "I can't talk to you anymore. The manager's upset. Please understand." Another from an old high school friend. "You got yourself tangled with the Collins family. Don't contact me. I don't want trouble." The wind seeped in through the cracks of the window frame. Emma pulled out the drawer of her desk, lifting the rent bill for the coming month. The numbers bled across the thin paper like a spreading ink stain. Her chest tightened. By the bed, her phone lit up, Ryan calling. She hesitated, then answered. "I'm downstairs," he said. "Can I come up?" Emma looked into the small mirror by the door. Swollen eyes, hollow cheeks, a figure as fragile as paper, and yet within her gaze a faint sliver of light. Yes. Minutes later, a knock. Ryan stepped inside his coat damp with rain. He handed her a paper bag. Hot soup, the smell of chicken, celery, black pepper. Warm steam curled up against her hands. Emma suddenly realized she hadn't eaten all day. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice raw. "But you shouldn't be here. I should be anywhere you need me to be." She shook her head, smiling faintly bitterly. "What I need is a life that isn't used as someone else's weapon. I won't let them do that. They're a pack. You're just one man. Then I'll stand in front of the pack." The words came out quietly, yet in the 10-square-meter room, they thundered like a storm. Emma looked at him for a long time. She noticed raindrops clinging to his lashes, the roughness of his hands faintly trembling. The sight of a man who could have chosen silence but instead chose to speak, knowing it might cost him everything. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I." "Then why are you still here?" "Because standing here afraid, that's what courage is." Emma laughed through a tear. She lifted the spoon, took a sip of soup. Warm, gentle. Her throat loosened, her tears softened. Outside the window, the rain thickened, a sheer curtain falling between the small room and the restless city beyond. Emma's inbox pinged a new email. Subject line, a friendly clarification from the Collins legal office. The message read, "The Collins family respects all honest labor. However, certain individuals have deliberately sought attention, exploiting media coverage to tarnish the family's reputation. We urge the public to remain discerning." The words flowed soft as silk, yet Emma felt every sentence slice into her name like a thin blade hidden beneath velvet. Moments later, the headlines shifted. Insider claims waitress pursued billionaire's son multiple times. Truth bent easily like a cheap spoon in the hand of a magician. Emma shut her laptop. Her hand rested on the sketchbook. Fingernails scratched lightly against the page, making the faintest sound, the fragile resistance of something too thin against a force too heavy. She whispered, unsure if the words were meant for herself or for the shadows pressing in. "I'm not a gold digger. I'm not." The Plaza Hotel ballroom. Titanium white lights blazed like day. A waltz drifted smoothly through the air. Tables draped in lace. Rows of reporters lined the walls. A charity gala, also the stage for an engagement announcement if all went according to plan. Mrs. Margaret Collins took the stage, her smile flawless, rehearsed. Beside her, Charlotte Harrington stood radiant, every inch the picture of perfection. Down below, Ryan's hands tightened together, his chest rising and falling. He heard his mother's voice. "Our two families are delighted to." He stepped forward. "I'm sorry," Ryan said into the microphone. "I do not consent." The hall froze. A fork slipped onto a plate, the metallic clatter sharp as ice. "Ryan!" Margaret's voice rumbled low like thunder before a storm. But Ryan faced the crowd, hundreds of eyes upon him. "I will not get engaged out of duty. I will not sell my heart in exchange for a business deal." A murmur swelled, then erupted into a wave of noise. Cameras flashed wildly. Charlotte gave the faintest nod, her expression relieved. Margaret strode forward, gripping the microphone, her voice no longer able to hold its perfect edge. "You are destroying the honor of the Collins name." Ryan's reply was steady, each word hammered into the air. "Any honor that demands crushing an innocent person is not honor worth keeping." He set the microphone down, turned, walked off the stage. Each step felt like pressing against a storming sea. And beneath the roar of the crowd, Ryan heard only one sound, his own heartbeat fast but unwavering. Night. The Queensboro Bridge stretched across the darkness like a silver comb laid against the sky. The wind from the East River cut sharp and cold. Emma walked, clutching her thin coat tighter around her. She needed air. She needed to escape four suffocating walls. Her phone buzzed. A message from an anonymous number. "Congratulations, you just ruined the wedding of the century." She froze for a moment, then deleted it. Another message appeared. "From Ryan," I said no. Emma stopped completely. The lights of the city blurred in her vision. The wind pushed tears from her eyes, scattering them like paper boats across a puddle. Why, she typed back. His reply came. "Because if I let them decide today, they'll decide the rest of my life. And yours too." Emma leaned against the cold iron railing, tilting her head back. Tonight, the New York sky held no stars, only endless windows glowing like tiny eyes across the skyline. Somewhere among them, one belonged to Ryan. And despite the enormity of the city between those two lights, there stretched an invisible thread thinner than a strand of hair, stronger than steel. Morning. Emma poured herself a cup of weak coffee. What she lacked wasn't only money, it was the peace to drink a cup of coffee without fearing the ring of a phone. The door creaked open. Her landlady peeked in. "Emma, I'm sorry. If you can't make rent this month, then I understand." Emma smiled, thin and fragile. The woman flushed slightly and withdrew, leaving behind an unfinished sentence, the kind of half-apology shared among the poor sympathy but survival first. Emma looked around her small room and told herself, don't collapse. She opened her sketchbook, returning to the unfinished window she had drawn yesterday. She added light, a diagonal stroke, a thin curtain, a potted plant. Each line of pencil was a breath of normalcy she wrestled back from the storm. Across the city, Mrs. Collins watched the morning news report on TV, her face unreadable. She lifted the phone. I want another story about that waitress. Dig deeper. The worse the better. Pay double. She hung up, then stood before a mirror. In the reflection was not only the mother who fought to shield her dynasty, but also the little girl she once had been poor to the bone, vowing never again to let poverty touch her. Her hand clenched tight. To her, Emma wasn't a person. Emma was a curse returning to her doorstep. A text from Lily, her best friend from high school. Have you seen the clip? They're saying you faked your tears for attention. I don't know who to believe. Emma typed back, believe what you know about me. No reply. An hour passed, then 2. The shadows stretched long like the dark silhouette of the building across the street. Next door, a stereo blasted rock music. A dog barked in the hallway. Ordinary sounds suddenly felt sharper, harsher, as if the world itself were scraping against her skin, trying to draw blood. She opened her laptop, typed part-time near me. The listings scrolled past waitress, dishwasher, delivery driver. Every click ended with a sigh. The words, no applicants with scandals, never appeared, but she could read them in the blank space between each line. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Ryan. I'm coming by tonight, bringing paints. For what, she asked. So you can finish the window, in color. Emma stared at the words, then let out a small, fragile laugh. Some things didn't solve problems, but they saved people. Night. The two of them sat on the floor of the small apartment. A piece of cardboard spread out between them. A box of cheap acrylic paints lay open. Emma dipped her brush into yellow and dragged a thin stroke across the window she had drawn. Ryan sat beside her, clumsy but intent, his hands steady with concentration. Do you think people can keep us silent forever? Emma asked. No, but they can make us silence ourselves. How do you stop that? By keeping on speaking any way you can. Paint, write, sing, or simply refuse to erase yourself from the world. Emma set the brush down, leaning her head against the wall. They call me a gold digger. I call you brave. She smiled faintly. Since when did you start saying things that sound like they belong in movies? It's not a movie, he said. It's what happens when you meet the right person. Outside, the wind stayed cold. Inside, the paint slowly dried. On the sketch, the window now glowed with a slim ribbon of yellow light, just enough to reveal a small table with a coffee cup and a chair. A place to come home to. Early morning. Emma stepped out of her Queens apartment building, coat thin against the chill hair tied back in haste. She hadn't even locked the door when a sharp click cut the air. She looked up. Lenses, dozens of them. A swarm of paparazzi closed in shutters, firing in rapid bursts. Emma, are you dating Ryan Collins? Are you planning to marry into money? Any comment on the gold digger rumors? The flashes blinded her, driving her back against the doorframe. Neighbors cracked their doors open, watching with a mix of curiosity and distance. One older woman shook her head and whispered, that girl's really brought trouble on herself. Emma trembled. She wanted to scream, I'm not a gold digger. But her throat locked tight. The relentless clicking drowned out everything. Then metal scraped. Someone yanked the iron gate shut with a slam. By noon, tabloids already splashed the photo across their sites, a waitress cornered, panic on her face. Caption, guilty or scared. Night. Emma sat on her bed and the window cracked open for a breath of air. Her phone buzzed. A new email. If you know what's good for you, disappear. If not, we'll make sure all of America knows who your family really is. Dirt poor. Single mother. Deadbeat dad. You think Ryan Collins wants a burden like that? The words blurred in her vision. Emma snapped the laptop shut and hugged her pillow tight. Memories crashed over her, a childhood of food stamps, days spent juggling school and part-time shifts. The sweat on her mother's brow wiped away with a frayed old towel. All of it, every struggle, twisted now into weapons aimed straight at her. Out in the hallway, a child cried. From the next room, a TV blared the hollow laughter of a reality show. But inside Emma's room, there was only the sound of her racing heartbeat, loud, uneven, and the shallow gasp of her breath. The next day, Emma sat for an interview at a small cafe. The owner glanced at her resume, then frowned. Emma Miller. The waitress caught up in the Aurelia scandal. Her body stiffened. I was only the victim. The owner sighed. I'm sorry. We can't risk media trouble. The door shut behind her with a cold final click. Emma wandered the streets. Car horns blared, exhaust fumes tangled with the sweet smell of fried dough. The city pulsed with noise and life, but inside her everything felt hollow. By late afternoon, the sky broke open. Rain poured down in sheets. Emma had no umbrella. She sank onto the stone steps of the subway entrance, rain drenching her blouse, soaking through to her skin. Tears mixed with the downpour. Strangers passed by without a glance, their umbrellas bobbing like indifferent shields. In that moment, Emma felt as small as a single raindrop in a vast ocean of people, one that could vanish at any second without anyone noticing. Meanwhile, at Collins Holdings headquarters, Ryan's name was struck from the executive roster. His bank accounts were frozen, his credit cards disabled. A message from his mother lit up the screen. "If you choose that girl, don't come back to this house." Ryan hurled the phone onto the chair. For the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to lose everything. No luxury cars, no penthouse, no power. Only 2 empty hands, and a decision he would never regret. His thoughts returned to Emma to the moment she trembled, yet still stood tall in that glittering restaurant. He knew the world was trying to crush her piece by piece. And if he didn't stand beside her now, then this love would be nothing more than a lie. That night, Ryan came into her room. Emma opened the door, eyes-rimmed red hair still damp because she hadn't had time to dry it. She looked at him, voice breaking. "You shouldn't be here. They'll destroy you." Ryan stepped inside and closed the door. "They already have. But I don't regret it." They sat on the floor in silence. Only the clock's tick-tock and the wind whining at the tiny window filled the room. Emma laid her head on his shoulder and trembling said, "I can't take this anymore. I'm about to fall apart." Ryan tightened his hand around hers. "I'll fall with you, but I won't leave you." A long pause. Then Emma whispered, "If I disappear tomorrow, what will you do?" Ryan answered, "Steady and certain I will find you, even if the whole world stands against us." The next morning, New York's biggest paper blared the headline. "Ryan Collins rejects engagement, all for a poor waitress." A stolen photograph of Emma and Ryan sitting together in the rain splashed across every front page. Social media ignited some voices, spat venom. Others whispered sympathy. Mrs. Collins summoned to the press, her declaration cold as stone. "My son is being manipulated. Our family will take action." Her gaze was a death sentence. Emma knew she had been pushed to the wall, but in Ryan's eyes, the fire burned brighter than ever. He leaned close and whispered to her, "They can strip everything from me, but this love they can't touch." The grand ballroom of the plaza shimmered like a galaxy. A massive crystal chandelier hung above each prism, scattering candlelight into golden constellations across the hall. Guests in gowns and tuxedos flowed like a river of glittering sequins. The notes of a cello blended with a piano, luxurious, elegant, and cold. This was New York High Society's charity gala, where every handshake carried the weight of millions. Outside the ballroom, the press jostled for space, paparazzi lined up ready to capture the next headline-worthy moment. The Collins family entered at the center of it all. Mrs. Collins, in a sleek black gown, walked with such poise that the air itself seemed to stiffen around her. Ryan walked beside her, his expression stern, his gaze unflinching, not even pretending to smile. Whispered voices rippled through the crowd. "The Collins heir is rebelling." Then, before the room could settle, the MC's voice rang through the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome a very special guest this evening, a young woman we deeply admire." The ballroom doors opened. A slim figure stepped through. Brown hair loose around her shoulders, a navy blue dress simple but striking in its quiet grace. Each step sent her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. Emma Miller. The ballroom froze. That's her gasp broke out. The waitress. The gold digger. Cameras swiveled, flashbulbs burst in a frenzy. Emma stood tall, drawing in a deep breath. Inside, her legs trembled. But her eyes blazed not with fear this time, but with a choice she would not bow her head again. Ryan froze too. He hadn't known she would come. His heart pounded, half panic, half pride. Across the room, he caught the glare of his mother, sharp as a blade fixed on Emma. From the front row, a silver-haired man rose to his feet. His tuxedo was cut in subtle plaid, his face marked by deep lines at the corners of his eyes, the kind carved by decades of storms weathered. A microphone was handed to him. The ballroom fell silent as though the room itself held its breath. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice raspy yet warm. "My name is Edward Whitmore." The ripple was instant. That name was legendary on Wall Street, founder of Whitmore Capital, one of the evening's largest benefactors. Edward turned toward Emma, bowing his head slightly in respect. "Tonight I'm not here to speak about stocks or real estate. I'm here to speak about a rainy afternoon 7 years ago." The crowd stilled further. Even the music behind faded to a thin hum. 7 years ago, Edward said slowly, "I was in a car accident on the corner of Roosevelt and 44th. The car rolled. Smoke poured. Rain came down in sheets. People stood back, not because they didn't care, but because they were afraid. Afraid it might explode." He paused, his hand tightening around the microphone. But in that crowd was a thin young girl wearing a cheap sweater holding a grocery bag from a discount store. She dropped it, ran to me, clawed at the glass, called me sir, as though I were her own father, and pulled me out of a car leaking gasoline. Gasps rippled like a wave. Someone whispered, "My God!" Cameras snapped furiously toward Emma. Edward's voice softened. She asked if I could stand. Then she pressed a rain-soaked napkin into my hand. On it was a phone number. "If the police need a witness, call me. My name is Emma Miller." Ryan turned to look at Emma. She stood, frozen lips trembling. The smell of gasoline, the sting of smoke, the pelting rain, all of it came rushing back. Her hands had bled, breaking that glass. The tiny scar on her finger was still there. Afterward, Edward continued. "I asked my secretary to find her, to thank her. But Emma vanished into this city like millions of anonymous workers trying to survive. All I had was that napkin, which I've kept in my wallet for 7 years." From his jacket pocket, he drew out a thin envelope. Inside was the napkin, yellowed with time. His voice grew harder. "And then weeks ago I saw her name in the papers, labeled a gold digger." He swept his gaze across the hall, steel in his eyes. "When the woman who saved my life is smeared as filthy simply for being poor, then what does this charity gala even mean?" The words landed like stones. Someone coughed to mask their discomfort. A journalist lowered her camera, throat tight. Mrs. Collins sat straighter, her fingers digging into the armrest. Her face was calm, but the small twitch in her throat betrayed her. Edward smiled gently, now turning fully toward Emma. "Emma Miller, I owe you my life. I've searched for you 7 years. Tonight, before everyone here, let me say this. I see you as my rescuer, my benefactor. And I invited you here not to serve us, but so I could serve you. With thanks and with an apology for the injustice you've endured." He gestured. From a side door, staff wheeled in a small walnut chest, intricately carved. Edward opened it himself, lifting out a simple city plaque engraved with, "For courage beyond fear, Emma Miller." The ballroom erupted in a collective gasp and then fell utterly silent. In an instant, every gaze shifted. The whispers of gold digger from mere minutes ago died, their invisible tongues cut short. Edward stepped forward. Each stride was a hammer blow against the wall of prejudice. He stopped before Emma, his aged eyes glowing with respect. "Thank you, Emma," he said, "and forgive us for being 7 years too late." Emma's lips parted, but the lump in her throat caught her voice. She could only nod, her shoulders trembling. Ryan, just a few steps away, felt his chest burst open like a window thrown wide after a long, brutal winter. The grand ballroom of the plaza glittered like a galaxy. A massive crystal chandelier hung above each prism, scattering candlelight into golden sparks across the hall. Guests in gowns and tuxedos flowed like a river of sequins. The cello and piano blended every note, elegant and cold. This was New York high society's charity gala, where every handshake carried the weight of millions. Paparazzi crowded the corridors outside, waiting for the next headline moment. The Collins family entered the center of gravity. Mrs. Collins, in a black gown, moved with an icy grace that seemed to freeze the room. Ryan, at her side, kept his gaze steady, face solemn, unwilling to fake a smile. Whispers spread. "The Collins boy is rebelling." Then, before the murmur settled, the MC lifted the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, by the request of Mr. Whitmore, and with the organizers' approval, we recognize Emma Miller tonight as an honored guest." Polite applause began in scattered bursts, then grew swelling into a roar. Some guests stood, a few cameras lowered. Mrs. Collins remained seated. Her hands, interlaced thumbs, pressed so hard her knuckles whitened. Her eyes were flat as ice. Across the room, Mr. Grant, who once flung wine at Emma, attempted a stiff smile as if to join in applause. But when Edward Whitmore's eyes cut toward him, his grin cracked and collapsed. Ryan moved quickly to Emma's side. He didn't touch her. He knew every gesture now would be magnified, but stood parallel, a wall of warmth at her back. "You okay?" he whispered. Emma drew a deep breath. "I am." For the first time, the word wasn't a mask of survival. It was the truth. Edward returned to the microphone. "One last proposal. The Whitmore Foundation will fully fund Emma's studies in interior design, the dream she set aside years ago to support herself and her mother." He turned to the camera's voice resonant. "Anyone who used the word gold digger, correct it in your minds. The right word is courage." Applause thundered again, this time raw, unrestrained. Women dabbed their eyes. A reporter lowered her pen, unsure how to frame questions when the story had already answered itself. Emma stepped half a pace toward the microphone. She faced the sea of faces, once walls of judgment, and realized they were simply people afraid of something, afraid of shame, of losing power, of poverty returning. Her voice trembled but rang clear. "I thank Mr. Whitmore. I don't believe I did anything extraordinary, just that. When I saw a man in danger, I couldn't stand by. I am poor. But poverty is not a crime. And poverty does not give anyone the right to spit in my face. The final line struck the ballroom's ceiling and came crashing down, vibrating through the air. From the third row, a woman in pearls began clapping. The guest beside her joined, and then a wave rose, standing ovation. Emma bowed, fighting tears. Only then did Ryan reach for her hand, not pulling her close, just placing his palm gently over hers, pressing once. A spark of contact. She met his gaze and saw not rescue but recognition. Mrs. Collins rose. She stepped to the microphone, her smile sharp as a blade. "What a touching story," she said, every note perfectly pitched. "The Collins family has always respected courage." She pivoted her glance, slicing across Emma. "We also respect order." The air tightened. Ryan heard the warning buried in her tone. He stepped forward, voice firm. "Order is only worthy of respect when it does not crush the truth." At that, a small smile touched Edward's lips. He nodded as though approving the blow struck. Murmurs rippled across the hall again, but this time the current had shifted. The MC closed the ceremony. "Let's return to music." The orchestra shifted into a gentle waltz. Yet the ballroom was no longer the same. Eyes that once sneered at Emma now lingered with curiosity, even respect. Reporters approached with softer questions. "Where will you study? What would you say to young workers chasing their own dreams?" Emma answered briefly, modestly. In her chest, the heavy stone she had carried for months finally shattered. Ryan leaned closer. "Want to step outside? The air's easier on the balcony?" "Yes." They walked out. New York stretched beneath them, a sea of light spilling like stars. The night wind carried the salt of the river. Music from inside floated out faintly, already fading into background. Emma set her hands on the cold stone railing, the chill racing along her arms. "I'm afraid I'll collapse again." She exhaled. "But maybe. I'm finally standing." "You're not standing alone," Ryan replied. The balcony door opened softly. Edward joined them, hands in his pockets, careful not to intrude. He looked toward the Queensboro Bridge glowing in the distance. "I've told my secretary he'll contact you about the scholarship. And if you need work that doesn't demand you bow your head, let me arrange it." Emma turned, eyes shining. "Thank you." Edward smiled. "Don't thank me. Just accept it. Sometimes the right thing needs permission to be done." In that moment, beneath the New York sky, the balance had shifted. The word gold digger fell away like a tarnished coin. In its place, another word was etched sharp and clear: benefactor. Inside the ballroom, Mrs. Collins stared through the glass, her reflection cold and rigid. She knew the storm she had unleashed had turned, and to reclaim her power, she would have to choose between truth and control. Emma turned her face into the wind, closing her eyes. When she opened them again, the city lights reflected back, not as unreachable glitter, but as a steady path forward. Here and now this night, she was no longer the humiliated waitress. She was the honored guest of her own life. The plaza's grand ballroom had barely warmed after Emma's public recognition when another chill swept through. The music thinned to a few cello notes. At the back, an event coordinator rushed a tablet to the MC. Its glow lit his cheekbones, draining the color from his face. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, straining for composure, "the organizers have just received a document from the law firm of Cormack & Associates. As it concerns the honor of tonight's guest, we ask Mr. Edward Whitmore to address it." Every gaze snapped to Edward. He nodded, once steady despite the weight of the moment, and stepped forward. Behind him, the LED screen flared to life with the words, "Internal Memo, Ashbury & Co. PR Agency." The crowd buzzed like a hive struck with a stick. Edward's voice cut through, low, deliberate, unflinching. "Before tonight's gala, a young attorney sent me these documents. She had once been an assistant at Ashbury & Company, the agency hired to shape the narrative about Emma Miller. Let's see what these emails say." On screen, a thread appeared, from mcollins@collinsholdings.com to account@ashburypr.com. Subject: narrative for waitress incident. Priority frame is gold digger. Plant a few anonymous sources in the restaurant circuit. Maintain rhythm 3 pieces per week, first 2 weeks. Costs as agreed. Gasps broke across the room. A glass clinked hard against a plate and went silent. Mrs. Collins did not flinch. Her hands clasped so tightly the knuckles blanched. "Fabricated," she said, her tone pure frost. "In an age of deep fakes, anyone can fakes." Audio clip, Edward interrupted, gesturing to the text. The speakers crackled. The faint sound of a boardroom. A pen tapping wood, and then a woman's commanding contralto. "We don't need to kill her. Just dirty her up. Tag her as a gold digger and the public will do the rest." The oxygen seemed to drain from the hall. Ryan slowly turned toward his mother. Emma's breath caught her fist tightening around the fabric of her dress. A reporter called out, trembling but relentless, "Mrs. Collins." In that recording, someone says, "Tag her as a gold digger. Do you confirm it's your voice?" Margaret Collins let out a brittle laugh. "Every day a dozen fake stories about me circulate. Don't be naive." She leaned to the microphone. Even so, order must be protected. An unbalanced relationship will destroy my son and— Enough, mother. Ryan's voice sliced the air. Not loud, but absolute. He walked to the center of the dance floor, shoulders squared under the blaze of the chandelier. He faced his mother and then the hall. Tonight we heard two truths. One, Emma once saved a man's life. Two, someone paid to smear her. He turned to Emma. His eyes burned with a light money could never buy. You. He held out his hand. Emma placed hers in his steady despite the tremor in her chest. The entire ballroom froze on that clasp, the living image of a vow. Ryan lifted his chin to the crowd, his voice hammering each word. I don't need the fortune. I only need her. Because love, real love, cannot be bought. The silence cracked into gasps, then hushed again. A woman covered her mouth, tears welling. A young reporter lowered his camera, his own faith shaken and rebuilt in the same instant. Mrs. Collins's face flushed not with shame but with fury rising hot at her temples. You are destroying your father's legacy, she spat. Ryan shook his head. Father left values, not chains. If I must sell my heart to inherit, then I reject the inheritance. From the side, Mr. Grant shot up desperate. We're being emotional. Business needs reason. Edward's gaze cut him like glass. Reason. What reason justifies smearing a poor girl to mass cowardice? He turned to the MC. Put the invoices up. The screen filled again, Ashbury and Cumberby billing sheets, influencer seating, tabloid placement, social amplification. At the bottom, one name in digital ink, M. Collins. The roar rose like surf against rock, then died to a dangerous stillness. A Major Collins Holdings shareholder stepped forward, adjusting his tie. The board will not condone company funds used for a personal smear campaign. If verified, we will demand a special audit and consider legal consequences. The words fell like a second hammer. Mrs. Collins's gaze swept the room and locked onto Emma, cold enough to bruise. Her voice for the first time wavered. You think she deserves you. Tomorrow you'll see how quickly they tire of her. Tomorrow, Ryan answered, lifting their joined hands higher so every lens could see. I'll still be holding her hand. And if the world throws stones, I'll shield her. A single clap rang out Charlotte Harrington. No smile, only gravity. She struck a second time, then a third. As if on cue, the hall joined in applause, spreading row by row until the entire ballroom was on its feet. Not polite. Defining. A reporter called out Miss Miller. What do you say to those who called you a gold digger? Emma raised the mic. She glanced at Ryan's hand wrapped around hers, his pulse a steady drum. Her smile was not defiance, but naked truth. I don't need their apologies. I only need them to stop shooting at the poor with prejudice. The crowd exhaled in a low collective "oh." Not scandal, but recognition. The MC seized the moment. This gala was meant to honor courage and kindness. Tonight, thanks to Mr. Whitmore, we've seen both. At the room's edge, Mrs. Collins turned sharply, heels striking fast as if fleeing the mirrors before they could betray her reflection. Not a matriarch, but a girl still terrified of poverty. A few board members trailed her out, silent, wary. The storm was no longer hers to command. On stage, Edward laid a hand on Ryan's shoulder, then Emma's. From here on, he told the cameras those who repeated gold digger should repeat, I'm sorry, with the same volume. The music swelled again, but changed key brighter, steadier. Guests pressed forward to shake Emma's hand, this time with weight. A young waitress slipped close, whispering through tears. My name's Emma, too. Tonight, you saved me. She fled before Emma could answer, leaving only a tear behind. Ryan leaned down, murmuring against Emma's ear. If you want to leave, I'll take you. Not as fugitives, as victors. She nodded. Together they descended the stage steps. People parted for them, forming an aisle. No longer daggers, the eyes that followed were the eyes of students watching a hard lesson taught. The ballroom doors swung open. Night air rushed in, carrying river salt and damp leaves. At the threshold, Ryan paused, turned back once. We choose truth. The rest is yours. The doors closed. Inside, voices dropped lower, less vicious. Outside, the corridor glowed with softer light. Emma inhaled deep. Her hand in his was no longer cold. Above them, the glass ceiling reflected two small figures back straight. And in that reflection, no further words were needed. For everything had been said the only way it mattered in the light before everyone. From this night on, they walked no longer under a ceiling of prejudice, but beneath the open sky. The doors of the grand ballroom slammed shut behind them. Emma and Ryan stepped into the wide corridor, the red carpet glowing under the soft golden lights. Inside, the violin music faded to a whisper, replaced by the thunder of their own hearts. Ryan's hand gripped Emma's, warm, trembling slightly as though he had just laid down the weight of a lifetime. Emma looked up, her eyes shining in the light. Slowly, a smile spread across her face, not the forced smile she once wore to hide fear, but the smile of freedom. Cameras flashed wildly, paparazzi shouting. but neither of them lowered their gaze. Emma tilted her face toward the light, letting it touch the damp traces on her cheeks. Ryan leaned close, whispering, "We did it." She shook her head softly. "No, you did it. For both of us." He smiled, eyes steady. "No. Us." They both laughed, and in that laughter, the walls of prejudice, the gilded thrones, the chains of order, all of it crumbled into rubble without weight. On the steps bathed in gentle light, they stood not as a billionaire's heir and a disgraced waitress, but simply as two people. And that was the greatest victory of all. New York, early spring. The breeze carried the faint sweetness of cherry blossoms. On a quiet Brooklyn street, storefronts glowed with soft colors. At the corner, a simple wooden sign swung gently. The hearth. The wooden door opened, a wind chime tinkling. Inside, the smell of freshly roasted coffee mingled with buttery pastry. Morning light streamed through the large window, spilling across wooden tables and simple fabric chairs. No marble, no chandeliers, only warmth. Behind the counter stood Emma, white shirt, brown apron, hair tied neatly back. Her hands moved quickly over the milk frother, her face radiant with a smile that seemed finally unforced. Ryan carried out a tray of warm croissants, sleeves rolled up, a quiet ease on his lips. Customers trickled in, the elderly flower seller from down the block. A construction worker just off his night shift. A young couple still bickering but sharing one cappuccino anyway. Here, no one was asked what they wore, how much they earned, or where they came from. Everyone was welcomed the same by a smile and a steady gaze. On the wall hung a single framed photograph, Emma and Ryan hand in hand walking out of that ballroom years ago. Beneath it, written in Emma's own hand, "Money can build castles, but only love and dignity can build a home." The door chime rang again. A homeless boy, his coat frayed and thin, peeked in hesitantly. Emma smiled, beckoning him forward. "Come on in, sit down. Today the sweets are on the house." The boy's eyes widened, then he hurried to a chair. Ryan poured him a steaming cup of hot chocolate. The rising warmth wrapped around the boy's trembling hands, chasing the cold from his skin. For a moment, the cafe grew quiet. Then soft applause broke out, gentle, unpolished, the sound of hearts recognizing one another. Emma looked at Ryan. He shrugged with a mischievous grin. "We didn't open this cafe to get rich. We opened it to remind people that poverty is never a crime." She nodded, eyes glistening. In them flickered the memory of her late mother, the shadow of a childhood lived under disdain, and the light of a present where she no longer had to bow her head. Evening settled. The cafe slowly emptied, sunlight painting the tables in gold. Emma sat across from Ryan, both hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. He placed his hand over hers, silent for a moment. "Did you ever think," he whispered, "that everything would lead us here, just to a place this small?" She smiled. "Small, yes, but ours." Outside the window, the city bustled on. But inside, only peace remained, a kind of peace the grandest ballrooms had never known. There are castles built of gold, yet hollow inside. And there are little homes built of dignity and love, where every soul is seen by the heart, not by the wallet. Emma and Ryan chose to build such a home. And that at last was the greatest victory. In the window's reflection, two figures sat side by side. Emma and Ryan, hands clasped, their smiles radiant. On the table, a small candle flickered its flame, steady as a faith that would never die. Money can build castles, but only love and dignity can build a home. True home.